Yeah, I think my comment relates actually to the previous two questions, and it's an issue that the Reverend brought up, Professor Alister brought up in his talk, which was when he was describing atheism as a meme much like religion. And it relates to both these questions, because there was an assumption there that one can't understand the debate if you're on the atheistic side. One can't understand how a religious person can hold that meme. And it's precisely because memes should be subject to counterattack and subject to a process of defense, whereas the religious meme says, oh, well, it's about faith. So it's got a kind of inbuilt self-defense mechanism that resists any of that kind of attack. And I think that was exposed by the previous two questions.
Right, maybe because of these questions are quite similar theme, perhaps we'll see if we can... There's a gentleman in the middle over here. Anybody else got a point? Stunned into silence.
So, my name is David Wood, Fellow of the Royal Society. I have a question for Professor McGrath. Clearly you think that the explanations of religion given in Professor Dennett's book don't apply to your own religion because your own religion is reasonable and you have good scientific reasons, whatever, for believing it. But do you concede that some of these explanations might apply to some of the other, no doubt, wacky religions and crazy beliefs about the supernatural that people have? After all, not all the beliefs are compatible or consistent, so we need some other account for these other beliefs. So do you concede that any of these explanations might be valid in at least these cases?
Why don't we start with that last question, Alister?
Well, thank you very much for that question. It's a good question. I think I'm puzzled by Professor Dennett's model of religion. Religion is a very complex entity indeed. And it has ideas, but it also has narratives, it has values, it has rituals, it has structures, and one has to use a multi-layered approach to make sense of this. I personally find Roy Bhaskar's approach, set out, for example, the possibility of natural and others, the idea of stratification, different levels, with a non-reductionist interaction between them. Now, as I was reading Professor Dennett's book, my question was really, at what level is he aiming? Is he aiming at the level of ideas? What is the level which he is doing this? And certainly, for example, if you look at the evolution, I use that word perfectly happily, or, for example, religious ritual, you can see developments that are shaped by the environment. But it's not uniform. For example, Islam and Christianity are very, very different. I generalize, but Islam on the whole tends to resist cultural assimilation. Christianity thinks it's a good idea because they have very different understandings of what God is all about. So certainly, there is something here, and that's why I think it's so good to begin this discussion. But I don't think it's actually at the level that Professor Dennett thinks it is. And that's why I think, we need more reflection on this. In my own case, I'm a Protestant Christian, and Protestantism in effect came into being because it felt there's a need for self-reflection and critique. And I represent that strand. It is extremely self-critical and prepared to reject what's wrong, hold on to what's good. So I'm very happy to be stimulated to have this discussion. But again, I just think that religion is very, very difficult to define. In fact, I'd go further than that and say it actually, as a category, religion really, I think, is a product of the universalizing tendencies of the Enlightenment, which actually wanted everything to be pretty much the same. And I just don't think that works. I don't think there is a single definition of religion, which is why I've pressing Professor Dennett a little bit. I think actually there are individual religions, and we've just got to learn to live with that. There may actually not be a single unifying definition that actually holds them together at all.
Are there any other points that you wanted to pick up from...
Well, I will, but then I must make way for Professor Dennett. Very briefly, if I may, 2 points. One is science and religion, are they compatible? Well, clearly, they are both such broad categories that actually it's extremely difficult to generalize. What I would want to say is you will find religionists who are excruciatingly rude about science and ignorant of its methods. You will find scientists who are excruciatingly rude about religion and ignorant of its beliefs. That's just the way life is, I fear. But I think there is a habitable in-between zone, which I think merits further exploration. That's why I would certainly place myself. I would certainly say that in recent years there's growing interest in this, partly because it just seems being so significant. So I think there is room for further advance, but there are debates that need to happen along the way. Question back there, basically, I think the implication of the question was that somehow religious memes are sort of way so well defended they don't critique themselves, whereas everybody else's memes are, basically subject to rational belief. I have difficulty with that. A, because I believe that question to show the self-referential paradox. In other words, my ideas are rational, yours are not. Well, actually, all of us are caught up in a matrix of complex factors that need to be more carefully examined. But again, I mean, my conversion was purely intellectual. Purely intellectual. I was an atheist, believing it offered the best explanation of all things. I became a Christian believing it offered our best explanation. So either my atheist memes or my Christian memes were faulty at some point, but I believe the same argument would actually apply to whichever state you chose to look at. I think my real concern is that some people use memes in a way that somehow seems to override the basic idea of rationality. And I find that quite puzzling. I don't think Professor Dennett does that, but I think that made it implicit in the question.
Dan.
Let me deal with those questions in turn. Can we study religions from the outside? I think absolutely yes, and I think it is the claim that we can't, which is very familiar coming from many people in many religions, that you have to have faith in order to study faith. This is, I think, simply an unacceptable defense mechanism which must be rejected out of hand. There is absolutely no reason why. It reminds me of the claim that some feminists make that only women can study women. We would never let bankers say, you have to be a plutocrat to study bankers. We would never let actually musicians say, you have to be a fine musician to study music. And we shouldn't permit the religious to say, if you don't have faith, you can't study us. In fact, in my book, I propose recognizing that ignorant study of religion is not a good idea. I propose, I have a modest proposal. Let the religious leaders in any religion who are leery of letting scientists study their religion, let them set a really demanding entrance exam in all of their beliefs and all of their rituals, and they can give it, they can describe, they can set this exam themselves, and they can grade it themselves, and any scientist who wants to study religion who can't pass the exam is excluded from cooperation. However, they also have to give that same exam to some of their own priests, and they have to be blind graded. I submit that this will deal with that problem quite satisfactorily. Whether science and religion are compatible, it's not a question of whether they're compatible. I'm not saying that science should do what religion does. I'm saying science should study what religion does. And science can study what religion does, whether it's compatible or not. Religion is a phenomenon in the world. It's many phenomena, as Alister says. It's a very complex matter. Science is used to studying very complex matters. The biosphere is very complex. There's many, many different species. There are many, many different species of religion. Absolutely. They differ in all sorts of interesting regards. If you really want to understand that complexity, instead of just glorying in it and saying, oh, it's much too complex to study, you study it scientifically and you begin to eke out taxonomies, and you try different taxonomies, and you see what makes the taxonomies hold up better than others. And indeed, we'll find former religions, we'll find assimilations, we'll find things that didn't seem similar at first, which now turn out to be very similar. We'll find things which looked very close at first, turn out to be really very different. That's what you learn when you adopt a rigorous scientific attitude. The fellow at the back who talked about inbuilt defense mechanisms, that's, I think, one of the things that I'm particularly pleased with in the book is that I describe a variety of defense mechanisms which have evolved over time. They've evolved culturally. This is not in your genes. These are good tricks. They are ways that religions protect themselves from rational scrutiny and from other threats. And the people who employ these tricks do not have to understand them. They did not design them themselves. They did not figure out why they work. They don't have to. They are simply the beneficiaries of these strategies in the same way that the cuckoo is a beneficiary of the strategy of pushing the egg out of the nest. Now, for the cuckoo, that's in the genes. In human beings, it's in the memes. You don't have to understand it. You don't have to have figured it out yourself. But you do have to have been implanted with that idea by your co-religionists, And that's why you say the things that you say.
I'm very glad you raised the issue about the exam, because it was one of the things I had meant to tackle you on this morning. If you study a religion from the outside, which I would agree with you, entirely justified and legitimate exercise to do, but inevitably there are going to be points of not understanding or of missing something. And the idea that an exam would be an appropriate test of understanding a religion completely horrified me. I just thought, Dan really hasn't got it. That bit there, I thought, he really doesn't understand. But a faith can be a lived experience. It's not a body of knowledge on which you can be tested. It's a living experience, which perhaps may be something that you accumulate, experience at different times in different ways.